following selection presents a theoretical foundation for the political structure of human society and present justification for the elimination of absolute monarchy. John Locke, who lives from 1632 to 1704, was an English political philosopher whose second treatise of civil government, written in 1690, later influenced both the French and American revolutions. It is also the first philosophical statement of liberalism, a doctrine that sought the elimination of the arbitrary power of government and the establishment of legal equality, religious toleration, and freedom of the press. This begins on page 77 of your book. And the book, for source citing purposes, is Aspects of Western Civilization by Perry M. Rogers. So here's what John Locke says. Political power, then, I take to be the right of making laws with penalties of death, and consequently all less penalties, for the regulating and preserving of property, and of employing the force of the community, in the execution of such laws, and in the defense of the commonwealth from foreign injury, and all this only for the public good. Okay, so political power, the power of the government, is the power to enforce all laws, with the penalties of death and therefore all lesser penalties. Okay, chapter 2, of the state of nature. And remember, the state of nature essentially is how humans lived with each other before there were governments for most of human history. To understand political power right and derive it from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in. And that is a state of perfect freedom to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they think fit within the bounds of the law of nature, without asking leave or depending upon the will of any other man. So people are perfectly free in the state of nature. A state also of equality, wherein all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal. Everybody has the same amount of power, no one having more than another, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection, unless the Lord and Master of them all should, by any manifest declaration of his will, set one above another, and confer on him, by an evident and clear appointment, an undoubted right to domination and sovereignty. So what he says is pretty much everybody's equal unless God, and he's talking about God here, comes down in front of everybody and makes it very clear that one person should be in charge. Other than that, everybody's equal. But though this be a state of liberty, yet it is not a state of license. Though man in that state has an uncontrollable liberty to dispose of his person or possessions, yet he has not the liberty to destroy himself or so much as any creature in his possession, but where some nobler use other than its bare preservation call for it. So essentially, you can't kill anybody, and he kind of seems to make the argument here that if you're going to be going around killing other animals, you need to be either eating them or using their hides for something, etc., etc. It's for some nobler use. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone and reason, which is that law teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. Don't kill, hurt other people, or steal their stuff. For men, being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker, all the servants of one sovereign master, sent into the world by his order and about his business, they are his property, whose workmanship they are, made to last during his, not another's, pleasure. So we're all made in the image of God, is essentially what he's saying here. And being furnished with like faculties, sharing all in one community of nature, there cannot be supposed any such subordination among us. God makes us all equal, therefore no one should rule over everybody else. That may authorize us to destroy another as if we were made for one another's uses, as the inferior ranks of creatures are for ours. So you can't treat other humans like we treat animals, using them just for our purposes. Everyone, as he is bound to preserve himself, ought he, as much as he can, to preserve the rest of mankind, and may not, unless it be to do justice to an offender, it's important, take away or impair the life, or what tends to the preservation of life, the liberty, health, limb, or goods of another. So unless somebody is a bad person, is a criminal, you can't take away any of their rights. And that all men may be restrained from invading others' rights, and from doing hurt to one another, and the law of nature be observed, which willeth the peace and preservation of all mankind. The execution of the law of nature is, in that state, put into every man's hands, whereby everyone has a right to punish the transgressors of that law to such a degree as may hinder its violation. So in a state of nature, everybody has the right to bring justice to anybody else who might transgress this natural law. So if somebody's taking your property, killing your family, trying to hurt you, it's your natural right in a state of nature to punish or kill them, so that you can also prevent others from breaking these similar natural laws. For the law of nature would, as all other laws that concern men in this world, be in vain if there were nobody in that state of nature had a power to execute the law, and thereby preserve the innocent and restrain offenders. And thus, in the state of nature, one man comes by a power over another, but yet this is not an absolute or arbitrary power. So you have power over other people, but only when they're breaking the law. Chapter 3 of the state of war. It is reasonable and just that I should have a right to destroy that which threatens me with destruction. For by the fundamental law of nature, man, being to be preserved as much as possible, when all cannot be preserved, the safety of the innocent is to be preferred, and one may destroy a man who makes war upon him, or has discovered an enmity for his being, for the same reason that he may kill a wolf or a lion, because such men are not under the ties of the common law of reason, have no other rule than that of force and violence, and so may be treated as beasts of prey, those dangerous and noxious creatures that will be sure to destroy him whenever he falls into their power. So people who are going to take away your natural rights, your property, your life, your freedom, are just like animals in the woods trying to kill you, and so you can kill them too. And hence it is that he who attempts to get another man into his absolute power does thereby put himself into a state of war with him, it being to be understood as a declaration of a design upon his life. For I have reason to conclude that he who would get me into his power without my consent would use me as he pleased when he got me there, and destroy me too when he had a fancy to it. For nobody can desire to have me in his absolute power, unless it be to compel me by force to that which is against the right of my freedom, i.e. to make me a slave. So if somebody wants to have absolute power over you, like a king or a dictator, essentially they want to make you a slave and use you for some purpose that you don't want to be used for. And this person is making a war on you. And he's going to make the argument, John Locke is, that you can respond to this person, this absolute power, a dictator, a king, in the same way that you would respond to a beast in the woods trying to kill you. To be free from such force is the only security of my preservation, and reason bids me to look on him as an enemy to my preservation who would take away that freedom which is the fence to it, so that he who makes an attempt to enslave me thereby puts himself into a state of war with me. He that, in the state of nature, would take away the freedom that belongs to anyone in that state must necessarily be supposed to have a design to take away everything else, that freedom being the foundation of all the rest. If they're going to take your freedom, they're going to take everything. As he that, in the state of society, would take away the freedom belonging to those of that society or commonwealth must be supposed to design to take away from them everything else, and so be looked on as in a state of war. If they're taking your freedom, they're going to take your property, they're going to take your life eventually, is what John Locke is saying. So they're at war with you. Chapter 4 of Slavery. The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but to have only the law of nature as his rule. The liberty of man in society is to be under no other legislative power but that established by consent in the commonwealth, nor under the dominion of any will or any restraint of law, but that legislative should enact according to the trust put in it. So people shouldn't be under any laws that they haven't agreed to through their representatives in some sort of legislature. So he's leaning towards or telling us that a democracy or a republic is the only legitimate form of government, essentially. Freedom is not what Sir Robert Filmer tells us, a liberty for everyone to do what he lists, to live as he pleases, and not to be tied by any laws. But freedom of men under government is to have a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society, and made by the legislative power erected in it, a liberty to follow my own will in all things where the rule prescribes not, and not to be subject to the inconsistent, uncertain, unknown, arbitrary will of another man, as freedom of nature is to be under any other restraint but the law of nature. So we should be free in all things except when we're under laws that are agreed upon by either us as members of society or our representatives that we agree on as members of society. This freedom from absolute arbitrary power is so necessary to and closely joined with a man's preservation that he cannot part with it, but buy what forfeits his preservation and life together. So essentially, if you don't have freedom, you don't have life. Okay, Chapter 8 of the Beginning of Political Societies. Man being, as has been said by nature, all free, equal, and independent, no one can be put out of this state and subject to the political power of another without his own consent. The only way whereby any one divests himself of his natural liberty and puts on the bonds of civil society is by agreeing with other men to join and unite into a community for their comfortable, safe, and peaceable living one amongst the other, in a secure enjoyment of their properties, and a greater security against any that are not of it. So, the government is a government that needs to be agreed to by the people who are governed. That's why you get this contract between the people and the government. The government is there for the people, also to protect them from